For 210th days in 1944, a single American agent fed Hitler's war machine a stream of reports so convincing that entire German divisions shifted their defenses, chasing shadows that did not exist. In candlelit bunkers from Paris to Berlin, Nazi intelligence pored over his messages, certain they were reading the words of a loyal informer inside the Allied command. They never realized that the man they trusted most was working for the United States all along. He was known to the Germans only by a cryptic call sign, Agent Crown. To the Office of Strategic Services, he was Lieutenant Joseph Bradford, a 32-year-old linguist from Chicago with a calm voice and a gift for calculated deceit. His mission was born out of desperation. By early 1944, the Allies were preparing the greatest invasion in modern history. Yet every plan risked collapse if the enemy guessed where it would strike. The Nazis had ringed the French coastline with bunkers, artillery and barbed wire. If Hitler knew that Normandy, not Calais, was the target, thousands of young Americans could die before their boots touched the sand. So Washington decided to fight with imagination instead of gunfire, sending spies to weave a fabric of lies strong enough to hide the truth. Bradford had been recruited from the Army Signal Corps, where his fluency in German and Spanish made him invaluable to OSS analysts. Decoding intercepted messages, calm under pressure, he had the kind of composure that made deception believable. When the OSS created a network of double agents to mislead the Nazis about Allied intentions, Bradford volunteered. The plan was simple in outline, terrifying in execution. He would pose as an embittered American intelligence officer secretly offering information to the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service. Every word he transmitted would appear to betray his country. But in reality, each message would be crafted in Washington, reviewed by British counterintelligence, and approved personally by General Eisenhower's deception staff. The first transmission went out on a cold February night from a safe house near Lisbon. Bradford sat before a radio the size of a suitcase, its dials glowing amber as he keyed a message in Morse. Allied troop movements along the southern English coast suggested a build-up opposite the Pas de Calais. It was a deliberate half-truth, the opening note in a symphony of deception later known as Operation Fortitude. Within days, Abwehr cryptographers had decrypted the message and forwarded it to Berlin. The Germans compared it with reports from other agents, many of whom were unknown to them, also controlled by the Allies through the British double-cross system, and concluded that Bradford's information matched. They authorized payment, code-named him Crown, and demanded more. The hook was set. To maintain credibility, Bradford needed a believable past. OSS forgers built him one. Ration cards, identification papers, even a faded photograph of his sister in New York, played by a female agent in another unit. They created false bank records showing small sums wired from neutral Switzerland, bribes from supposed Nazi handlers. The Abwehr believed it all. Over shortwave frequencies that bounced off the ionosphere, Bradford sent updates about phantom divisions, imaginary convoys, and fake generals. Each message followed the strict rhythm of authenticity. Too accurate and he'd be suspected. Too vague and he'd be ignored. He mastered the delicate balance, peppering his texts with minor errors, misspelled names, outdated codes that made them believable. By April 1944, German analysts trusted Crown enough to relay his reports directly to Hitler's headquarters inside the Wolf's Lair. De Fuhrer read summaries that reinforced his own assumptions. The invasion would strike the Pas de Calais, the shortest route from England to France. He ordered the 15th Army to remain in that region, withholding vital armored divisions from Normandy even as Allied ships filled the channel. Bradford's lies were buying time and lives. Yet for Bradford, the mission was psychological warfare of the highest order. Every night he listened to his own falsehoods echo back across Europe and intercepted German broadcasts. He knew that men on both sides would die believing the fabrications he spun. The burden pressed on him, but the discipline of his craft left no room for doubt. His OSS controller, Major Evelyn Ross, reminded him in coded briefings that deception was a soldier's weapon, no less honorable than a rifle. Still, Bradford kept a small notebook where he wrote one line after every transmission. Truth through lies, God forgive me. Lisbon, officially neutral, buzzed with intrigue. The city's cafes brimmed with diplomats, black marketeers and spies who traded rumors like currency. Bradford's cover as a shipping consultant allowed him to mingle freely, overhearing snatches of conversation from German officers on shore leave. At night he met couriers from the British embassy who passed him microfilmed maps and typed drafts for his next transmission. Each night he risked exposure. Opver agents had begun to question how their new informant could operate so boldly, but his composure disarmed suspicion. He even once dined across the table from a German intelligence officer who offered to arrange safe passage to Berlin. Bradford smiled, raised his glass and declined, claiming his wife was ill in the States. The officer believed him. The OSS monitored every message he sent, matching them against Allied operational plans. The smallest inconsistency could destroy months of preparation. The stakes grew higher as D-Day approached. German reconnaissance planes photographed fake tanks, made of rubber, positioned along the English coast opposite Calais. Bradford reported these as genuine. He described the supposed First U.S. Army Group under General George Patton as preparing for a massive assault. The Germans, convinced by the consistency of his details and by other controlled agents repeating the same narrative, concluded that any landing in Normandy would merely be a diversion. By May 1944, Crown's transmissions had become mandatory reading in Berlin. Hitler personally cited them during staff briefings, praising the precision of his American source. Bradford's handler, a colonel in the Abwehr named Karl Richter, began urging him to obtain details about Allied shipping schedules. OSS analysts saw the request as both opportunity and danger. Provide too much, and the Germans might spot the fabrication. Too little, and they might suspect betrayal. Bradford crafted a middle ground, sending reports with minor inaccuracies that confirmed existing German expectations. His words moved divisions on maps hundreds of miles away from the true invasion zone. As spring turned to summer, Bradford lived in a state of perpetual tension. He slept little, haunted by the thought that a single intercepted mistake could, and not just his life but the secrecy surrounding D-Day. Lisbon's air carried the scent of salt and tobacco, and every ringing telephone could signal discovery. He carried a cyanide capsule sewn into his jacket lining, an insurance policy no spy ever wanted to use. Yet despite the pressure, he found a strange calm and routine. The careful tapping of the Morse key, the hum of the transmitter tubes warming his hands, the quiet satisfaction of another successful deception. Each coded burst that leapt into the ether drew him deeper into history's grandest gamble. Somewhere in England, hundreds of thousands of soldiers waited, unaware that their survival depended in part on an American linguist sitting in a darkened room across the sea. Bradford did not see himself as heroic. He was a craftsman of illusion, building safety out of lies. As he watched the green indicator light fade on his radio, he whispered the same words every night. Hold the line until the truth can march. For the next 200 days, Jack Donovan lived inside a nightmare built on precision, paranoia, and performance. Each morning he woke before dawn in his safe house in Old Pension, in La Habra overlooking the gray Atlantic, and recited his cover story until it felt more real than his own past. He was Karl Hoffmann, a communications clerk for the German Navy, transferred from Kiel to assist with decoding Allied radio traffic. He practiced his accent with a cracked mirror, smoked the same brand of cigarettes German officers preferred, and even mimicked the stiff way they saluted. The mission was simple in wording, impossible in practice. Make the Nazis believe he was one of them. Coordinates of a convoy, crossing the channel under heavy fog. Donovan copied it, altered one number, and relayed it to the German command via a captured transmitter hidden inside an abandoned lighthouse. The Germans took the bait. Days later, reconnaissance reported enemy U-boats patrolling the wrong sector while the real convoy slipped safely through. It worked. But with every success came suspicion. German officers in occupied France began demanding more proof of his loyalty. One night, an SS major named Vogel arrived unannounced at the Princhen, his boots echoing down the corridor like gunshots. He questioned Donovan for 3 straight hours under the weak glow of a lantern, asking about naval ranks, cipher tables, and personal histories that didn't exist. Donovan answered each calmly, using fragments of real German manuals memorized months earlier. When Vogel finally left, he turned at the door and said, "You're a strange man, Hoffmann. Too quiet for a clerk?" The sound of the door closing felt louder than any explosion. Behind enemy lines, communication was lifeblood and poison. Donovan couldn't risk sending full messages to London. Instead, he embedded codes in ordinary broadcasts. A radio transmission might list shipping schedules, but the first letter of every line spelled out a phrase the OSS understood. To an untrained ear, it was routine naval chatter. To Allied command, it was gospel. As the operation grew, Donovan's intelligence began influencing high command decisions. He warned of German troop movements near the Ardennes, of new radar installations along the coast, of mines placed in the English Channel. Each message saved lives he'd never know. Soldiers who would march on beaches months later under a rising sun. Then came Operation Mercury, a deception designed to mislead the Nazis about Allied invasion routes. Donovan was to convince German high command that the Americans planned to land near Calais rather than Normandy. For weeks he sent falsified maps, troop orders, and supply lists through the same radio frequency Vogel monitored. To make it believable, he risked traveling to multiple towns, planting evidence the Germans would later find. Abandoned crates stenciled with U.S. unit names, false documents dropped near checkpoints, even rumors spread in local taverns. The Gestapo began reporting sightings of American commandos preparing for a strike far north of the real invasion site. It was working, but success in espionage always demanded a payment. Late one evening in March 1944, a courier brought Donovan a sealed envelope bearing the Eagle insignia. Inside, orders to report to Berlin for a briefing on decoding Allied messages, proof the Germans had fully accepted his identity. But Berlin was death. The Gestapo headquarters was no place for an American spy. He needed an exit plan. London ordered him to maintain the act for 2 more months. Long enough to finalize the deception campaign. Donovan obeyed, though every step deeper into German bureaucracy tightened the noose. He moved through corridors of power where whispers could kill, where even loyal officers feared invisible eyes. Each handshake was a test, each smile a weapon. His closest call came during a meeting inside a commandeered railway office. Vogel appeared again, this time with a radio technician who claimed to have traced irregular frequencies back to the lighthouse transmitter. "Strange, isn't it?" Vogel said, lighting a cigarette. "Your sector, your frequency, your code." Donovan feigned outrage, accused the technician of incompetence, and demanded an immediate recalibration of the equipment. Then, in a stroke of improvisation that saved his life, he offered to demonstrate. He took the transmitter, tuned it, and sent a brief coded weather report, an actual German code he had memorized. When the reply came seconds later confirming receipt, the technician apologized. What neither of them knew was that Donovan had activated a decoy transmitter operated by the French resistance. He'd risked exposure to preserve the illusion, and it worked, again. But his nerves were fraying. Sleep came rarely. He began to hear phantom footsteps in empty hallways. Imagine invisible microphones hidden in walls. He wrote letters to no one just to remember who he was. Spring turned to early summer. Donovan had been Karl Hoffmann for 190 days. Then came the coded order that changed everything. Storm front approaching. Prepare withdrawal. It was the prearranged signal that D-Day was imminent. His mission, to mislead German defenses until the first Allied troops landed, was almost complete. For the final phase, Donovan had to transmit a massive series of fake reinforcement reports, suggesting that entire divisions were gathering near Calais. He broadcast for 14 straight hours, fingers trembling, voice hoarse, sending message after message as Gestapo cars prowled the streets outside. The deception held. German divisions remained stationed miles away while real American soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. By the time the Allies secured their foothold, Donovan was a ghost. His safe house was raided, the pension burned, and Karl Hoffmann declared missing in action by German authorities. OSS agents found him 3 weeks later, emaciated and delirious, hiding inside a collapsed bunker near Cherbourg. His first words upon rescue were not of triumph but of disbelief. Did it work? The officer who found him nodded. You fooled them for 200 days, Jack. The beaches are ours. When he finally returned to London, he expected a medal, perhaps a handshake from a general. Instead, he was told the mission would remain classified indefinitely. His name would never appear in official reports. His service never publicly acknowledged. The world would know about D-Day, but not the man who made the deception possible. Donovan accepted it with quiet grace, understanding that anonymity was the currency of espionage. Still at night he dreamed in German, spoke to ghosts in empty rooms, and woke wondering which identity was real. Yet history has its own conscience. After the war, fragments of his operations surfaced in declassified documents. Military historians later pieced together the Hoffmann deception, recognizing it as one of the most successful psychological operations of World War II. Donovan's work not only saved thousands of soldiers on the beaches, but also reshaped the entire strategy of Allied intelligence. The idea that truth could be weaponized, that a single spy's words could redirect armies, became a doctrine studied by future generations. As Europe rebuilt, Donovan faded quietly into civilian life, taking a job as a translator for the U.S. State Department. Colleagues described him as polite, reserved, and haunted. He never spoke of the war, never mentioned the name Karl Hoffmann. But sometimes when a German visitor entered the office, his posture stiffened slightly, as if slipping back into an old uniform. Even decades later, the line between reality and the role he played remained thin, fragile, and unforgettable. When the war finally ended, Europe breathed again, but not everyone found peace. Jack Donovan had survived the most dangerous deception of the 20th century. Yet the silence that followed victory was heavier than gunfire. In London, he watched crowds celebrate in Trafalgar Square, strangers embracing under rain-soaked flags, the sound of freedom echoing through streets once dimmed by blackout curtains. But he didn't join the cheers. For 200 days he had lived behind enemy lines pretending to be someone else. Now he no longer knew how to return to himself. His reflection felt like a mask, his own name foreign on his tongue. The intelligence officers who had sent him into the jaws of the Third Reich now spoke to him in careful tones, as if afraid he might still be listening for bugs in the walls. They gave him a new identity, again civilian consultant, and quietly transferred him to a post-war reconstruction office under the OSS successor, the newly formed Central Intelligence Group, the seat of what would soon become the CIA. America had emerged as a global power, its intelligence apparatus expanding across continents. Donovan, with his unmatched field experience, became a silent architect of that machine. He trained young agents not to shoot straighter or run faster, but to think deeper, to understand that wars were no longer won by bullets alone, but by perception, persuasion, and the careful manipulation of truth. He taught them the art of the double narrative. The fragile theater where one lie could protect 1,000 lives. Yet behind every lecture, his eyes betrayed exhaustion, the kind only a man who'd played God with information could carry. One winter morning in 1947, Donovan received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a small faded photograph, himself in a German uniform, standing beside a radio set, eyes hollow but determined. No message, no return address, just the image. It could have been a warning or a memory. He stared at it for hours before locking it in a drawer he never opened again. The past, it seemed, had a way of finding its own messengers. As the years passed, the world shifted into the Cold War's shadow. Espionage, once a desperate act of wartime survival, became a global chess game. Donovan watched the same methods he had pioneered against the Nazis now being used in new arenas against the Soviets. In Berlin, in Korea, in places the newspapers never printed. He advised quietly from Washington, his name buried in confidential memos, his words echoed by younger men who would one day be called spy masters. They studied his Hoffmann playbook, an internal OS document outlining his deception techniques: controlled misinformation, persona embedding, linguistic mimicry, and operational psychology. The memo bore no author's name, but among insiders, it was whispered, "That's Donovan's ghost teaching us still." But ghosts grow heavier with time. Donovan began keeping a journal, writing not for history but for confession. In those pages he wrestled with a single question: did I win by lying, or did I lose myself in the process? He described the loneliness of truth-tellers disguised as liars. How every victory in espionage carried an invisible cost. They will never know what silence feels like. After you've deceived the world, he wrote. Even peace sounds suspicious. He wrote about Vogel, the SS major who nearly exposed him, about the fear that still woke him in the night, about the smell of burning paper, and the sound of his own false name echoing across German radios. He ended one entry with a line that could have been his epitaph: "I didn't fool the Nazis, I fooled time." In 1953, a young journalist from New York tracked him down for an interview about the early days of American intelligence. Donovan refused, but the reporter persisted, sending letters praising the anonymous heroes who shaped victory. One letter ended with, "Some stories deserve to be told before they're classified forever." Donovan never replied, but he clipped that sentence and pinned it to his desk. He knew the journalist was right. History forgets what it can't see. And spies were designed to be invisible. But if truth was his weapon during the war, perhaps it was also his redemption. Slowly he began dictating fragments of his experience, coded and cautious, to an archivist at the National Records Center. He didn't want fame, he wanted accuracy. "Tell them we fought a war of shadows," he said. "Tell them lies saved lives." Then came a twist of fate no scriptwriter could improve. In 1957, German documents declassified by the Allies revealed that Karl Hoffmann had been posthumously awarded the Iron Cross by Nazi command for outstanding service in enemy communications. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who read it. The Germans had decorated their greatest enemy without ever knowing it. When the news reached Donovan, he laughed, a dry, incredulous laugh, and said, "I guess I finally got my medal." It was the only time anyone saw him smile about the war. The following decade, Donovan withdrew from public life entirely. He moved to a small coastal town in Maine, bought a house overlooking the Atlantic, and spent his days listening to shortwave radio static. To neighbors, he was just a retired translator, polite and private. But every evening at precisely 9 p.m., he tuned into a German frequency not to hear, but to remember the cadence, the rhythm, the language that had once been his second skin. Sometimes when a storm rolled in and thunder rumbled over the sea, he would whisper the old codes under his breath, as if sending messages into the past. The sea never answered, but he kept transmitting anyway. In 1963, on a quiet autumn morning, his body was found at his desk. Pen in hand, radio still humming. On the page before him were his final words. Deception was not betrayal, it was belief. I believed America needed to win, and I believed I could bear the lie. He was buried under a simple headstone that read only, Jack Donovan, 1915-1963. He served in silence. For decades his story remained buried, locked behind sealed OSS files marked top secret. It wasn't until 1998, half a century after D-Day, that declassification orders finally revealed the full scope of his mission. Historians were stunned. Intelligence experts called it one of the most brilliant solo deception operations in modern history. Psychologists studied his resilience, calling it a case study in identity endurance. Documentaries later described him as the man who weaponized trust. But for the American public, what resonated most was not the spycraft, it was the humanity. Jack Donovan was not a superhero, not a myth carved in marble. He was a man who gave up his name, his peace, and his place in the world so that others could live in one. His courage wasn't in the act of deception. It was in carrying the truth of why it mattered. As the camera fades to black, the narrator's voice grows softer, steadier, echoing through the screen like a memory carried by wind. In war, victory often belongs to the loudest guns, but sometimes it belongs to the quietest lies. For 200 days, one man whispered into the enemy's ear and turned the tide of history. He fought not with bullets but with belief. And when the war ended, his weapon was silence. Yet his story, America's secret spy who fooled the Nazis, still speaks, reminding us that freedom isn't just defended on battlefields. It's defended in the shadows.